welcome to a very experimental episode of RP Spotlight. The Elder Scrolls part is left out because much of the subject matter that we'll be covering has very little to do with Elder Scrolls. Yeah. In fact, I'm not even sure if this episode will get published. We'll have to see. But either way, if it does, well, welcome to the show. As always, my name is Mikey, and I'm your friendly neighborhood commentator. And today, with me tonight, I have a near and dear friend who is a fellow from Sweden. He's someone I've known for a very long time, and someone who I trust always gives it to me straight whenever I ask him for his honest opinion. And the reason I mentioned this thought is because one of the things that I try to stray from in this podcast is to frame a narrative or cause a biased influence on your opinion when we are having a conversation. The podcast has always been about a dialogue and you coming away with some sort of takeaway. Therefore, I've tried to avoid having too many folks that I am familiar with or know personally, such as my fellow guildies or personal friends. But in this case, considering the experimentation that I'm going to do for this particular episode, born out of A, desperation, and B, recent feedback, I'm willing to go ahead, and I feel with this gentleman, he is absolutely the best candidate for the job. He is someone who I feel has been in the top tier of our peers ever since I've known the man, and someone who has always strove for creating an immersive storyline for his fellow our peers. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have with us Catcid. Welcome to the show, dude. God help you. How you doing?
Thank you, Mikey. Happy to be here. And thank you for the graveyard speech, by the way. I can imagine that being on when I die one day. You can stand in front of the altar and say that same speech.
I think you misunderstand me, sir. I'll probably be pissing in your ashes rather than give you some sort of speech to you. That's too privileged for your taste.
Long dream. Anyway.
Yeah, as you guys can tell, we're good. So with all that being said, then we'll start with, as we usually do when it comes to the regular podcast episode, with some of the more structured questions before diving down the rabbit hole. How old are you? Where are you from, if you don't mind me asking?
I am from Sweden, like you already put. South of Sweden, actually. I am 27 years old, or I will be 27 years old this August. So there's that.
Dude, it makes me feel old too, because we've known each other for... We've known each other for damn near 5 years now, haven't we?
Yeah.
Where has the time gone?
I thought it was longer. It felt like I've known you since I was born, more or less.
Oh, that's because I was your conjoined twin. But your mom was like, get this disgusting thing.
We even have the same name. That's eerie. You remember that back in the guild? Where everybody had to differentiate between calling me Mike and you Mikey. Yeah. And sometimes, they made the mistake and then we had no idea what they were talking about.
God, it took some getting used to, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was interesting.
So, second question off the bat then is, how'd you get into video games?
Well, I got into video games when I was about, what can it have been? 8 or 9 years old. It was actually my father who borrowed a PlayStation 1 when it was released from a friend at work, and he brought it home and we all crowded around television and we played games like Crash Bandicoot and some old Batman game. I remember that, and some car game. I think it was Gran Turismo. It was like highlights in the week. We used to nag him about that he should borrow that game from his friend, and eventually he bought us a PlayStation. I think it was like that Christmas or something, and then we all crowded around and we played. Like, I remember our first 3 games. It was Diablo, the first Diablo, and it has Swedish translation too. That was interesting. And Gran Turismo and Rayman.
I remember Rayman. Are you talking about the Rayman that was like the
Yeah.
2D platformer?
Yes, exactly.
He had like no
Where
arm.
you could throw the glove. And,
Yeah. It had a weird story. Do you remember the story?
I don't know. Yeah, no, hang on now. What was it? I think it was sort of like the classical Super Mario story. I think someone, like a big bad boss, stole something from you, and you were gonna go through this world to find him.
Yeah, like the dude's
Something
name
like that.
was Mr. Dark, and he was like
Yeah, that's right.
green fellow in like a trench coat and top hat or something like that. And I think he
Yeah.
stole like all these different orbs or something like that that destabilized the world, and it was classic platform
Yeah.
or some shit.
It was fun. I mean, I still think it's fun. I downloaded the emulator like I don't know 6 months ago. Played a little. It's still actually pretty amusing.
I'm sure it is, but you know that the game devs were on something when they were making those levels, because some of them are kind of freaky, man.
Yes, like the pencil world. I remember that. It was like the worst part of the game where you had to like go. It was like pencils, and you had to jump over them because they were
Yeah,
dangerous
and if you got to the
edges.
point, you just fucking died. It's like that game
Yeah,
is
you
so
died all the time.
unforgiving.
It was so goddamn difficult. I don't think we ever finished it.
So you already answered the next question, which was what was your first game? But since you like to skip ahead, we'll
Yeah, sure.
jump over to
Everything I can do to ruin your life,
Yeah.
I'm happy.
So then, moving on. Then, what's your favorite?
This if you, it's a little it's a difference playing single player games and playing MMO games. It's sort of like they're both games, but I sort of differentiate them somehow. But I would say that my favorite game of all time is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, because I think I put more hours into that game than any other game ever. And even if it's from 2015, I still go back to it sometimes, and maybe I not finish the whole campaign, but I play for a few hours and until I'm satisfied, and then I put it down again. But yeah, I definitely say that The Wild Hunt is my favorite game.
Okay. You're the first person to tell me that it's actually their favorite. Despite its overwhelming popularity, you're the first person to say like, yeah, that's my favorite game.
I like to be unique.
Yeah, I know. You little snowflake, you. So disgusting. But what about The Witcher 3 do you think separates it from other video games?
The fact that it is so multi-layered. It's like I mean, it was recognized when it was released by basically all reviews that it is the best role-playing game that has ever been made. And I agree with that, because first of all, it's just everything about the game draws you in and immerses you in this world. And it's like all the characters are so interesting. I don't think there is like a single character in that game that I was, generally bored with. If it's the least favorite character, it was Dandelion, who is this long friend of Geralt, and he is a bard and a womanizer, and he always gets into trouble, and then he lies to all people and saying that he's the big hero and Geralt is the one who always gets in trouble. So I think he was there to be sort of the comic relief, but I found him to be at times a little too much. And I was sort of happy when I didn't have to have anything to do with him anymore. But otherwise, there is so much storytelling. Me, I'm a sucker for storytelling. That's what I love about video games. Is that they are sort of the new art form, in that they paint pictures and they tell you stories the way that only movies and books did before. And The Witcher 3 is so good at that. Like, even if you can go into some random little village somewhere in the fucking nowheres, and you take up some generic contract about, okay, I'm gonna kill something in the woods, and when you go at it and you never played before, you think, okay, I'm gonna kill it, I'm gonna collect the money, because that is how games usually work. But no, that's not what's gonna happen. You go out there and you track this beast, and then suddenly you find out that the tracks leads to like a village that has been eradicated by this thing, and then you find out that it wasn't actually a beast at all, that there was actually a rogue witcher that came there, and he killed everybody because they wouldn't pay him contract that he took. I mean, things like that, you always start off thinking it will be this normal, generic thing that you've seen thousands of times before in all other games, and then it just twists that around on you. And even if it's like some random side quest somewhere, you find yourself enthralled in plot lines and intrigues that you never thought you would find, and you find them in the most unlikely territories. And that is what I really immersed me and made me feel like this is one of the best games I've ever played in my whole life. So I think that answers your question.
It sounds like to me you're a fan of subverting the trope, where you have the expectation of one thing, but suddenly the end result is something that you did not expect at all.
Yeah, it surprises you. It's what it did all the time. It just surprises you. And it comes up with new ways to surprise you throughout the entire game. And I really feel like, wow. It's hard for me to relate to anyone saying that they had a boring time with The Witcher 3, because to me that's just like that's not possible. I mean, everywhere you look, there is interesting things to see. So
part of what The Witcher 3 speaks to me is that it's a sort of a noir story.
Yeah, it's
I
that
remember
too.
when I was over at your house, right? Although I didn't make it past the opening credits, there was this one really, really good shot where they're tracing the whereabouts of Yennefer, right?
Yeah.
And they're in that field, and it's flashing back and forth between Yennefer running through, trying to avoid the hail of arrows, and then it shows Geralt kneeling down in the grass, looking down at the footprint, then slowly rising up as he looks up at the field. That's a classic detective establishing shot in cinema, and that really speaks to me because I'm a big fan of like the hard-boiled genre. Like I don't know if you've ever read like Raymond Chandler and his Detective Marlowe series.
I haven't, but I know what you're talking about. I've seen that too in like movies and where they make use of those old tropes. So I know what you're talking about, and I agree.
Not only that, but and you can probably speak to this better than I can, but the whole Witcher universe itself, it's really grimy, right?
Yeah.
In fantasy, from Tolkien to, I guess if you want to argue for it, Wheel of Time. Sorry, Wheel of Time fans, please don't burn the torch. From Tolkien to Wheel of Time, it's always been on this massive grand scale, good versus evil sort of thing, where good is always pristine and evil is always nasty and dirty. But with, I guess, Geralt and The Witcher, he's steeped in it.
Yeah.
It's all dirty, right?
Yes, it is.
I remember I was playing through Witcher 2. I don't know if you remember this part or not, but he goes to the whorehouse that's filled with succubi, right? And the general, I guess, outlook on them is that they will devour your soul. But because the succubi are actually trying to keep themselves at bay, they resort to this whorehouse so that, they're not out there being predators and eventually being hunted down.
Yeah.
Each one of them, they're all sympathetic, which is interesting.
Yeah. They are humanoid, like humanoid beasts, sort of. And
right.
Yeah, that I loved about the Witcher franchise is that nothing is ever black and white. Like, never. It's like, especially in Wild Hunt, you meet so many people that you dislike and that have done horrible things, but they are not necessarily bad people. Like, they can be good people who have done horrible things, and they can be both. Like, one good example is the Bloody Baron in The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, who is this, nasty drunk, who is, he's a war veteran, and he has like tortured his family for years until the point where they run away. But at the same time, he's very devoted to his family. And when you start finding out more stuff, you find that he is that there is more to the story. Like, his wife's cheated on him, and he turned to the drink to cope, basically. But he never really intended to hurt anyone. It's just how things turned out, and that is what's so good about the Witcher franchise, because the way people aren't black and white, and events in real world aren't black and white. It's always, there are events and domino effects that happens that lead up to bad events, but the people are never very simple faceted. They're always, they are multi-layered, and they have their reasons. Even if you can condone or condemn what they're doing, it's never just the fact that, oh, this murderer, he was born evil and he does evil things because he is an evil guy. Like, that's never how things are. And the Witcher franchise really brings that out and shows it. You aren't necessarily a certain way just because you're supposed to be.
But at the same time, it's kind of a paradoxical thing, because, and the reason I say this is, I think Geralt says this one quote where she says something like, evil is evil, and it doesn't matter, what degree you're doing it through. The definition is always blurred. So if I'm forced to choose between one evil or the other, I'm not going to choose at all, or something of that nature. You know which part that's from?
Yeah, it's part of one of the cinematic trailers for Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Basically, Witchers are supposed to be neutral. They're supposed to be neutral in otherworldly events, and they are supposed to never interfere in anything. They are supposed to be, they don't pay tribute to any king. They are not part of any country. They are absolutely neutral, and they just wander the world. And then in this cinematic trailer, he rides with Vesemir, and they have done this contract for a bunch of soldiers where they have killed a fiend. And while he comes up to these soldiers, they are about to hang someone who has been accused for witchcraft, a young girl. And Vesemir is telling Geralt, he's like, "Don't interfere, Geralt. Just take the money and we'll go." But Geralt, he's suffering a little bit from the hero complex. So while they're riding away, he states this quote, and he says that if I have to choose, I'd rather not choose at all. And then he goes and he, goes all badass on these soldiers. And when the last soldier is he's crawling, he's terrified, his companions are dead by this super amazing, superhuman witcher. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And then Geralt says, "I'm killing monsters." Very cringy with the super voice, "I'm killing monsters." And that's, he means that just because you're a person or a human doesn't mean that you were not evil. They were, to him, they were evil. They were being mocked. And then, he kills him. He hangs him.
They're thinking about making a Netflix series about The Witcher. Or I think they're gonna. It's actually in development. I wonder how that'll play out.
What's it called? The pilot. It's already finished.
Oh, is it? So when's it going to be released?
I don't know. I think it is to be announced, but it's definitely in production.
I hope they do good with it. I kind of doubt it. They've had Netflix has some misses when it comes to video game or pop culture related content. I'm looking at you, Death Note. That abomination of a series. Anyway, enough gushing about Witcher 3, unless you want to continue gushing about Witcher 3.
No, we can move on. Otherwise, I have so much to say about The Witcher 3. If we're going to be stuck there, we could just dedicate the whole episode to it. So maybe we should move on.
Okay, so how about maybe some closing remarks on The Witcher 3? What was its biggest impact?
The biggest impact was the emotional delivery when the game was done. It was like you really got to know Geralt and his prodigal daughter, and you follow them through a long storyline. The first half of the game is dedicated to finding her, to finding Ciri, and you see sometimes, like when you find tracks and you meet people who can tell you, it flashes into another screen where you're allowed to play as Ciri and you follow the events that she went through. And then you have to piece together what happened, and then you're going to go and get her. And during those moments, you get so deeply connected with Geralt and Ciri as characters that they become like characters in a book, like when you're reading a book and the characters really get stuck with you and you see them and you sort of, when you play, then when you find her, there's interaction between them and you see this really strong emotion and you follow them through. Even I don't want to spoil the game for anyone who hasn't read, but you follow them and there's a big emotional roller coaster. And when the game was eventually finished and the story was done, I was just sitting there and I was just riding the waves, the feel waves, and that was really a big impact for me. And afterwards I was just like, wow, this game got 10 out of 10.
Last question about
Yeah.
Witcher 3, but only because I gotta ask. Yennefer or Triss?
Oh man. Well, I've always been sort of a canon guy. And even though my honest opinion is that Yennefer is, she's a bitch, and she's more, she's not very nice to Geralt, but there is still a very strong attachment between them, and Jennifer is the one I feel he was supposed to end up with. She was his lover of yore, and they have been through so much together. So I felt like she was right. And even though I really like Triss, she's not right for Geralt. I feel she's like the little sister somehow. She is, she's very warm and she's very merry and she smiles a lot and she's very devoted, but in sort of a sense, I feel like she has almost like a childish little girl crush on Geralt. So I definitely feel like Yennefer is the one he should be with, but I can also relate to why people would choose Triss.
Moving on then from that hefty subject, how did you get into MMOs? What was your first MMO?
My first MMO I ever played was SWTOR, the Old Republic, Star Wars: The Old Republic. And I got into it simply because I love Star Wars. Like, I really love Star Wars. And then I bought it on release back in 2011. And by then, I had no idea what roleplay was. I never heard of roleplay. I remember once a long time ago, I played World of Warcraft, just trying it out. And I saw this server, that was RP server. And I was like, what's that? What's an RP server? And then I joined it and I logged in and I wrote in general chat, like, what does RP stand for? And everybody was like, role play, with a question mark, like fucking idiot. And I was like, but what do you mean role play? I mean, World of Warcraft is a role playing game. Of course, why would you have servers that says role play? I mean, it is a role playing game. And well, nobody replied to that. And I didn't understand after a long time. And then I was playing Star Wars and I invited my friend to play with me, and then my friend, who was a role player, asked me, like, yeah, Star Wars The Old Republic looks nice, but why aren't you playing on a role-playing server? And then it came again, and it was like, what do you mean? What's role-playing? Like, what do you mean it's a role-playing game? And then he introduced me to role-play, and as I've always been, I like to write, I like to read, I was instantly hooked by the idea of role playing. Like, oh, so we can be in this game and we could pretend to be characters. Wow, why haven't anybody ever told me this? So we started getting into it, and then I joined. Okay, we can move on to the next question here. What was my first RP experience like? I joined up because I was playing Sith Lord, and I joined up with a Sith guild, a very noobish Sith guild. But I didn't know that. That was called Order. What was it? Like a bunch of Roman numbers, and they were, very young, inexperienced, noobish role players, just like me. And well, a lot of things that I understand now is stupid. I didn't know back then. So we had, Darths being bartenders, and we had Sith Lords being, I don't know, bounty hunters at the side, and we had a lot of weird things going on that I thought, was absolutely normal. And my very first roleplay experience was getting drafted into this guild, where, I basically just met a bunch of random Sith Lords on Drummond Cast, and I did all the mistakes new role players do. Like, I refer to people by their name, even though my character don't know their names, just because I read, the nameplate above their head. And it came to a point where, they started asking, well, how do you know this person's name? And I was like, oh shit, yeah, how do I know that? And I had to spontaneously come up with something. So I started making a story about how we met back in the academy and all, and she played on with it for me, and it ended up us being in a fight that I lost, and I became her slave because I had insulted her. That was my very first roleplay experience ever.
Okay, so there's a bit of material there to unpack, but one point I did want to cover was that you said your first MMO was Star Wars, but then you also mentioned that you played World of Warcraft a little bit before. So what exactly did you do in World of Warcraft? How'd you come across that game?
Well, the reason I say that Star Wars was my first MMO because I never played World of Warcraft in any serious way. It was basically, everybody, all my friends, they got World of Warcraft, and I think it was the first big MMO that hit the markets back in 2004. And I mean, we didn't have any AD or any, broadband for a long time. We didn't get that until, I don't know, around 2009, 2010. And then I dabbled a little bit into Warcraft, and I mean, I didn't have any idea how you played MMOs. I thought it was like, single player games. So I think I played in total 2 hours, where I walked around, killed some spiders or whatever, and died a lot.
Did you ever go back to it?
Yes, I did go back to it after SWTOR, and then mostly for the roleplay. I remember I've been back to it a couple of times, actually. Like, after me and my friend started playing SWTOR together, afterwards, there was a time when we both got a little tired of SWTOR, and we went to play World of Warcraft, and we had a very, very lovely RP sort of non-RP experience, where we created characters. We had a backstory for them. Basically, my character was a paladin called Malakin, who had been up and fighting the Lich King, and he was a complete idiot. And he had a brother back in Silvermoon who just wanted to eat mushrooms and get high. And then, they had a sister who disappeared, and their family was killed when Lich King attacked Silvermoon. And my character, he was a little obsessed with saving everyone because he had failed to save his family. So he developed a hero complex to sort of shy away from his sense of loss and failure, and then he got obsessed with the fact that he's going to make up for not saving his family by finding his lost sister. And then he comes back to Silvermoon and to grab his brother and be like, now you and I, we're going to go on this big journey and we're going to find our sister. And his brother's like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I don't give a shit about you. I just want to eat my mushrooms. I want to get high. And he's like, damn it, you're coming with me. We're going to do this, or I'm going to slap you around. So then we start from level 1, and we start just plowing through the levels, RPing every now and then, implementing the OOC aspects of the game into our roleplay, but saying that we're doing other things. Like, okay, we're not saying that we are these big heroes that are, saving the world. We are saying that we are doing something smaller than what we're actually doing, and that is just obstacles on our path, and we stop in taverns or just out in the wilderness and we roleplay. And we did that for a long time. I think we did it up to level 40 or something, and we like walked all the way from Silvermoon to Augury or something like that. We came a long way. And then after a while it just sort of faded out because my friend didn't want to come online anymore. Then I went back to World of Warcraft another time to when, after the Roses in Tor had stopped, to play a little bit with our mutual friend Carl. And he was in Partisan Some Guild, and he was a mage, and I was a night elf. But it didn't really stick. I didn't have so much fun, so eventually I abandoned the game. I've been back since.
You mentioned hero complex a few times. What do you mean by that term? What's its definition to you exactly?
Well, to be honest, I don't know the actual definitions in what it is in real life. But in my character Malakin, it was that he had an inflated view of himself, where he found himself to be absolutely amazing at everything. He was a paladin, so he was not worthless. I mean, but he was below average, I'd say. He was not in any way spectacular. But he thought that he was absolutely amazing, that he was like the hero of light, and he wanted to save everyone all the time. And he always wanted to be... He was sort of demeaning to people, especially women. He had a very sense of protection. Like, he wanted to protect those that he considered to be weaker than himself. Basically, that meaning he wanted to protect everyone. So he could, if there was a woman alone somewhere, he could come up to her and say, "You shouldn't be out here alone by yourself. Let me escort you." Things like that. Always trying to find situations where he could be the hero. That's what I mean with hero complex.
It kind of sounds like some sort of weird parody of the general RPer who tries to be the hero, or white knights in every situation.
That's it, yeah.
So you were doing a parody on the White Knight.
Yeah, sort of. He was the white knight that didn't, but the player, was of course aware that he wasn't the white knight. He wanted to be the white knight, but he could never cut it because he wasn't competent enough to be the white knight.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So by this point, by revisiting World of Warcraft a second time, you've learned a little bit more about RP compared to your first RP experience.
Yes, definitely.
My question to you is, how did you know that you were starting to stray away from your noobishness? You know what I mean? Like, when you look back and you think to yourself, "Oh man, I can't believe I did this," or "I can't believe I did that." We've all had those moments, but at some point you also figure out to yourself, "Okay, I'm starting to improve a little bit." How did you track your progress, if that question makes any sort of sense?
I think it really just came with me starting to, in Star Wars anyway, it came with the fact that I started reading up more and actually accept, because I thought that when I got into Tor that I had a very vast knowledge of Star Wars, because I read some books and I watched all the movies 200 times, but then when I got into the RP scene, I realized that there is so much knowledge to have that I had no idea even existed. So I had to sort of revisit myself and understand that I don't know anything. I'm actually a noob to Star Wars lore. And then I started reading about it, and I started watching other more competent role players, how they did it, and I started realizing that we are doing it wrong. I'm doing it wrong. Like, this is not how it works. This is stupid. I also started, I played through the main storyline as the Sith Lord, the Sith Warrior, and I got more, got more insight in how the society works and how the structure works, and I got a better grip on the in general. And then I realized, okay, so what we are role playing here is basically just misconceptions and, you know, people who are trying to be something else while still having the Sith Lord status as a way to, you know, back up badassness or to be superior. And I mean, when I started realizing that sort of roleplay is bad, that's a very difficult question to answer. It's just something that came over time. It's not something that it's just that I played more, I roleplayed more, I roleplayed with more people, more competent people, and then the insight there sort of dawned on me a little at a time. You know, it was sort of like growing up, you know. And after a while, I started realizing that people that are role-playing like this, they are trying to fulfill something in themselves by, for example, when you have the Cantina Darth, for example. Darths are, you know, they are very important and iconic characters in the Sith Empire and in the Sith social constructs and all that. So they wouldn't have time or the, you know, even the motivation or anything like that to go to a different planet, especially a planet like that is as decadent as Nar Shaddaa, to stand around and drink with people they consider to be scum. You know, it doesn't make sense. But people did it anyway because they wanted to be, they wanted to have the dark side, you know, sort of edgy coolness around them that you get that Darths have. At the same time, they wanted to be social with people in a cantina where they could interact, you know, and they also wanted to be a little bit above everyone else, and therefore you have the Darth title as a sort of, you know, stay away, I'm dangerous, and that they did in order to, you know, in my opinion anyway, fulfill OC issues with themselves. They were people who, you know, felt like they were lacking power in real life, and they were, I don't know, undermined a lot, or felt that they didn't have much in way of self. And then they go online, they put up the mantle of the Dark Lord, they make, I don't know, friends in the cantina, while at the same times they are the ultimate dangerous bad guys that also are sort of nice and, you know, help out damsels in distress, etc. Feel like heroes with badass powers. And as I started realizing this, or at least, you know, getting this opinion more and more, I took a step away from that.
This kind of makes me go towards, this kind of reinforces a notion that I have about roleplay and its nature thereof. I've always said that the heart, mind, and soul of roleplay is basically escapism, narcissism, and wish fulfillment.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, what you just said.
Speaking of Darths, however, let's move on towards one of your more finer characters, Darth Skaranos the Third, the very, in your words, ordinary amongst Sith when it comes to that. So that's an interesting choice of words when it comes to a character like that, especially a Darth, an ordinary quote-unquote Darth. What makes him ordinary to you? What? It's a very interesting choice of words. Why'd you choose those words?
When I made Darth Skaranos, it was a time when I started to. I felt that I mean, now even when I look back at it now, I still see that I had a lot to learn. Even back then, I made a lot of mistakes. But I think I had my heart in the right spot, because I started looking at all these stereotypical Darths. I mean, the Darths that I talked about before, they are even known by a trope, you know, Cantina Darths. When you speak of a certain trope of role player, you say Cantina Darths. And I was like, I want to make a real Darth. I want to make someone who is, you know, true to the title and true to everything that it means to be a Darth. And I tried to do that as well as I could, and I wanted it to be, and I wanted to explore the aspect of what kind of a person would that really be? You know, what would it mean to be someone like that, and how do you end up in that position? Those were sort of the themes that I wanted to explore, and I came to the conclusion that when I say ordinary, it is that, you know, Skoranos, he was really just, when you look at it, a big bundle of issues. You know, he was. I think that if he could have met a a psychologist from our world, they would have been able to give him, you know, a diagnosis that comes from, you know, a life of abuse, um, a life of, you know, a very hard life where you are, what's the word, molded into becoming something someone else wants to be. So, you know, he was suffering a lot of internal struggle. He was having, you know, he was self-conscious. He was he find himself, that he wasn't enough. He felt that whatever he did, he didn't make it right, and he hated himself for it. He was full of self-hatred, that he could never be what he was supposed to be. He always wanted to prove himself by doing what he thought he was supposed to do, which was, you know, killing Jedi. That was a very simple-minded goal. He thought that that's what I'm supposed to do, and by doing this, I will be better. I will grow up doing this, or I will become what I'm supposed to become. And he worshipped strength because he felt that he himself was weak, and he was basically insane. You know, he was driven insane by being a product of the Empire. And
well, let me break in real quick,
yeah,
because we're going to go down a deep rabbit hole that may need some sort of exposition.
Yeah.
You said a product of the Empire.
Yeah.
And the Sith Lords of this timeline are just a little bit different from the Sith Lords that we see in the movies and that we're generally acquainted with in, say, Rebels and the other TV series. So let's start with this question. Let's start with an answer to this question first before we continue any further. What goes into becoming a Darth? In your opinion, what goes into becoming a Darth? How does a person become a Darth? Through what means?
In order to become a Darth, you have to prove yourself in some way exceptional to the Dark Council. That is at least how it is in the Old Republic era. Things change over time. Like back in the Galactic Civil War, that is completely different, because then you have the rule of two, and during the rule of two, the two Sith, there are only two Sith in the galaxy at a time, and they both carry the title Darth. But back in the Old Republic era, the title Darth was a sort of like honorific, where it's like a title and a rank at once, but the rules are very undefined. It's like, if you prove yourself to be above other Sith by ripping a part of the galaxy out for yourself, you know, pulling yourself up the ladder and stepping over the corpses of your enemies to reach your goal, you can attract the attention of the Dark Council, and eventually you are promoted to Darth, because you have proven that I am ready to do whatever it takes, and I am powerful. Sort of. You show them that with your own hands, then you can get promoted to Darth. And since back in the Old Republic there were thousands of Sith, it became more and more common It was never common. It's not like if you just stay around long enough, you're going to become a Darth. But it was becoming more common because there were so many Sith Lords. I don't know if you think that answers your question, or
It does in a way, but my question is that more of the process of what the individual has to go through to make it towards Darth level. So, for instance, let's do this by asking the question: what would you say an individual has to do in order to be recognized by the Dark Council? Does that make sense?
yeah, the thing is that there is no definite answer to that question. It's like really up to it would differ from person to person and from circumstance. It comes from you proving yourself to be exceptional, like I've said. How do you prove yourself to be exceptional? Well, in any way imaginable, really. It's basically by succeeding where others fail, and stepping over your enemies and stepping over your rivals, and you are completely you rely only upon yourself, which is something that Sith values a lot. That you can handle yourself, everything is focused on the individual. And by proving that you are better than everyone else, you are recognized as Darth. So there is not a single question to your answer. I mean, on the contrary, it's no single answer question. Yeah.
Okay. Then how did Skaranos prove himself to be a Darth?
It was sort of accidental. He basically, he's a bulldog. He was a bulldog of a Sith. He was very simple-minded and possessed with a tremendous sense of need to do whatever goal that he had in mind. And so he was blessed with a sort of amazing endurance more than anything else. Not so much an amazing connection to the Force or tremendous strength. It was really just, he was so like he never gave up. He was sort of like if you see Naruto, He was sort of
stood down. No matter how many times he just threw him back down. It was like, that's his ninja way, damn it.
Exactly. Like, no matter how many times you threw him down, he always got back up. He would fight until every bone in his body was broken, and even then he would crawl forward with his teeth. He was very obnoxious in everything he did, and which led to that he didn't care about being really having a lot of authority. He didn't care about influence or power in themselves. That was just something that came to him because he was so single-minded in his pursuits that if he was given a squad, okay, you're gonna take out the enemy or whatever, then he was we're gonna fight until every last one of you are dead, and everyone who doesn't die with me are cowards. And he just even if he had tons of losses, he never stopped. And eventually, after years of being in the battlefield and years of, succeeding in, having victories because of this, he was recognized more as a, useful pawn. And therefore decided that he would have better use as a Darth, where he has a position where he can control others. And he sort of was put there as a pawn, but he didn't mind, because the only thing he ever wanted to do was destroy the Republic. And like, why he has that goal is basically just because he was taught his whole life that that's what we hate. And we hate the Jedi. They are responsible for everything bad. So if you carry all this rage inside you, because of how you have been treated and what you have been taught, he has to channel it somewhere. He chose to channel it there, and he was going to achieve that no matter what. But it was not because he is amazing in any other way.
Let's talk about one of the most formative people in Skoranos' life. Perhaps one or two women that have, let's say, scarred him the most. His mother. She is not a very kind person by any stretch of the imagination. What is her name?
LeFail.
LeFail. And how did she become a Sith Lord?
How she became a Sith Lord? She was a manipulative bitch, basically. She was the opposition to everything that Skoranos is. She desired power, wealth, authority, influence, and she shared his single-minded nature, in that she was going to do anything she could to go there, to get there. So I never outlined exactly all the details of what she did to reach the position that she eventually reached when she became Darth LeFail at old age, but I would imagine that she got there by nestling herself into people's heads and manipulating events to where she always became the one who looked to be, the more prominent and the better choice for everything. And when she had Skoranos, he was always he's actually her adopted son. Skoranos is from a very odd place of Nalhada, beginning, where from he was taken when he was an infant. And one can argue the legitimacy of this choice, but as I said, I was still a pretty young role player back in this time, and I still had things to learn. But that's how it is.
What makes that a bad choice exactly?
That's in hot space, maybe.
And
I don't know. It's I'm not saying that it is a bad choice, but I think that you could probably argue that it is. Anyway, okay. And Skoranos came into her care, where as he grew up, she tried to use him as a pawn in her games, where he, constantly failed because he was not like her, which ended up to her taking out her rage at him and letting him know his entire life what a failure he is and how worthless he is. And that became sort of a single-minded, his single-minded need to show that show him to prove himself that he isn't, to, make his mother happy. So I think that, simple way of putting it is that Skoranos, he had mother issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
And moving on, then let's talk about the second woman, who has also impacted your character severely. Let's talk about her. What was her name?
Kilara Andivan. It was played by we just called her Key because of Kilara. She came into his life very random. I started up a guild around Skoranos called the Three Fleets, which is really not Three Fleets. It was really flotillas, but Three Fleets was better.
Flotillas.
Yeah. So the whole idea of the guild was that when Emperor Vishit declared that we're going to have, truce with the Republic, there was a lot of discord in the Empire. And Skoranos' master was one of the ones who were, the most upset by this cowardly, or what they perceived to be a cowardly action. And so during several years, decades, he crafted a plan where he formed a secret network of allies and secretly constructed basically a guerrilla war, uh, a guerrilla sort of army that consisted of 3 dreadnoughts led by a little fleet each, and they were gonna continue to basically, hit and run tactics against key targets of the Republic and continue the war in secret.
You mean more like a special forces strike team sort of thing? Or
yeah, sort of.
Okay, gotcha.
And he put his 3 apprentices to lead it. And that was Skoranus, Archavin, and Trithorn. And they had a very unorthodox relationship, because apprentices are usually rivals, but they were very they stood very close to each other and very deeply allied. And especially Skoranus, who had no real sense of, reaching more power or more authority. He just wanted to crush the Republic, so he was not really a threat to anyone in that sense. And Trithorn rebelled against their master, or sort of. He ran off and went against their master, and was, he was said that he was gonna die, and he was a master. He became the antagonist of the guild, and he started crafting ideas how he could take power for himself, and Skoranus was charged to hunt him down and kill him, which was, a very conflicting thing for him. And in this, the reason I brought this up was because it was during this that he ran into Kilar, because she was sitting on a position, and this was a very long time ago, mind you, but we had a storyline playing out where she was sitting on a position where she could help them in this endeavor. And as she got to know Skoranus, they found out that he was actually in need of her influence, because she was a what's the word? Marchioness? Or do you know what's the word? She was a figure of on Alderaan, because she was
a noble. You mean an Alderaan?
She was
noble.
An Alderanian noble, yes, and she was a
Marquess or something like that.
Marchioness, I think is the word.
Okay.
Marchioness, something like that. So they decided to get married for the political power that he needed through her, and his master also told him that he thought that this was a tactical and wise choice. And as they got to know each other, he realized that he generally was very impressed by her, because she had, Skoranus worshipped strength. That was his whole, if he worshipped anything, it was definitely strength characters. And he was very impressed by her, because she was, like him, very alone in the world. And even though, to him, she was non-force sensitive, but she had built a whole life by her own 2 hands. She was a warrior, she was a bounty hunter, and he felt very compelled by her, and she felt very compelled by him, and it led into a roller coaster of romance that never really was a romance. it was more. They were always dancing around the subject. Skoranus was sort of obsessed by her. She
Like
was
a will
attracted.
they, won't they?
Sorry, what?
Sort of like a will they, won't they sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Came close, but eventually they didn't go there because of events that happened. She was in love with another man at the time, which Skoranus had killed in jealousy. Which pulled them apart when she found out that he was actually responsible for this character's death. And she, it was hot cold sort of position. And eventually, when he realized after a long time that he had driven her away from him, and he came to a position where Trythorn and him was to meet for the last time, he sacrificed his life to take out Trythorn, and when he died, he thought of her. Sort of.
So you're telling me he dies?
Yes, he does. He dies in a self-sacrificing act to kill Trythorn.
Did he succeed?
Yes, he did.
All right, cool. I was just wondering. I remember this plot, but I never got to ask if there were ever any loose ends or left out details, as some writers like to put in their stories. You know what I mean?
No, part of it was actually because at that time I had moved towards my new character, Cain Daedalus, and joined up with
terrible character that was.
And I had
joined up with the
we
terrible
were moving,
guild as well.
Ruled by this weirdo half animal guy called Coldrax, played by a freak. And so this same freak took on the mantle of Trythorn and helped me end the storyline with Skoranus and lay the guild to rest. And that's when I joined up with the gangsters of the flowers.
The flower gangsters. That's
the flower gangsters.
Who comes up with that shit? I don't know.
Some idiot. Probably some American.
It's probably some American, but okay, so moving on from Skoranus to Cain Daedalus. Now, this gentleman is, in my opinion, from what I know, much more human to me than Skoranus. As you said, Skoranus was a bulldog. He was more of an animal. Cain Daedalus was more of a human, a broken human, but human nonetheless. Where did the idea for Cain come from? Well, how did you start forming him in your mind?
The idea of Cain actually came from a character in Stephen King's The Dark Tower. A character called Eddie Dean. And he's not a gangster at all. But I enjoyed the character, and I enjoyed a lot of the character's troubles and issues. And I thought that I was very inspired, and I took a lot of his essence with me, and added some of my own ideas, and created Cain Daedalus. And then when he was created, of course, he was sort of not a finished product, because he came into himself later as I roleplayed with him more and got deeper into the Red Rose Syndicate. So he sort of half developed himself, actually.
Now you make, with Darth Skoranus, you did Sith RP. With Cain, you did Criminal RP. What were some of the major shifts that you had to deal with when you were hopping from one niche to the other?
None. Actually.
Really?
I didn't think about the fact that there was any problems with it. It was
Not
I,
problems, but shifts. Like I would imagine both Sith RP and criminal RP are different in nature. You know what I mean?
yes, they were. I was at that time after Skoranis that, but this was before we settled the storyline. All that was hanging in the air, and I was, I'm a mafia fan of mafia, and I felt like it's time for me to leave the Sith scene. I want to do something else, and I saw people doing criminal RP, and I was like, yeah, I want to try that. And then since I just been a guild master, I decided I'm going to make a new guild called the Network, which was going to be based on, 1920s to 1950s mafia elements. But after a while of doing, I was putting it up and everything, and I created Cain Daedalus with the persona that I thought would like, and he was meant to be a gangster boss for this guild. After a while, I felt like I'm not, I don't want to run a guild again. I'm not sure I want to do that. And very conveniently at this time, I talked to the player behind Kilara, what I was planning to do, and then she said, "Oh, this is so cool because Mikey and his roses are coming back to the scene as well." And I was like, Mikey, oh yeah, that American dude. I spoke to him once on TeamSpeak, and then she sort of was the third person in our introduction, right?
Right. She got us together, and from there it was off to the races.
Yeah, that's right. And then I sort of scrapped the whole idea with the network, and I felt like, yeah, I'm gonna go into I'm gonna go into the roses and
That was
join
probably
this
the
scene.
stupidest decision you ever made.
It was, yeah. I've regretted it ever since, especially the weird guild master. That was the worst.
Weirdo. But
Yeah.
talk to me. One of the things that I find a little interesting about Cain Daedalus is, one of the things I find interesting about Cain is his ego. He's got a bit of an ego on him,
Yeah.
but at the same time, he kind of has a low self. He also has a bit of low self-esteem for himself. It's an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah. It's sort of it's sort of like a contrast in him that he feels that um, part of him he feels that he is the shit in a lot of things. He is very impressed by his own intellect, and he's very self-serving. For one, he's a sociopath. He pays very little heed to other people's emotion. He doesn't even understand a lot of people's emotions. But at the same time, he's always carried this hole with him, and where he's felt that he failed his brother. Like his brother was his big idol and his big hero, and his brother taught him everything that he ever knew because they were orphans on the street of Nar Shaddaa, and his brother was the one who, he knew how to talk, and like they say, he had the talk and he had the walk, and he supported them, and he took care of them. He made sure they had money, and Cain just sort of came along the ride. And then they had tragic events which happened, which eventually caused his brother to get addicted to drugs. And Cain never got over the fact that that his brother died that way, and that he could have saved him, that he could have supported him better or helped him, and he always took that upon himself, that it was his fault in the end. And that's something that came to really define him later, because especially with the stories we had in the Roses, there was a lot of people that came and went. There was a lot of people who came around and they died, that he had an attachment to. And that was something he could never handle, never deal with. The fact that people died around him and he never got people. And then that played onto his sense of failure and sense of lack, that he lacked power, and to solve this, he turned to drink, and after a while he became a fully fledged alcoholic. Like after I'd played him for about 2 years.
Yeah, it was a good 2 years. It was a. Well, it was a. What's it? 2 years? I thought it was like 3.
Yeah, I played him for more than 2 years, but after about 2 years of roleplay, he developed alcoholism to deal with his issues.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Eventually, the roses. I stopped them, and we went our own separate paths. You went to a few different games. Now, as I understand it, you settled on Final Fantasy XIV.
Yes,
What
that's
is
right.
that game like in comparison to Star Wars: The Old Republic? What do you like about it versus what do you like about Star Wars? Let's do a compare and contrast here.
Well, they are quite, literally two different worlds. Um, they are different in everything from engine to layout to mechanics. They are. Tor is. Um, what can you say? Tor. It's a set of boxes that are furnished by photographs.
Theme park.
Sort of. Yeah, it's a theme park. Final Fantasy is. It's similar, but not on the same level. Final Fantasy is much more open. It has a much more multifaceted.
I gotta break in here because you're cutting out a lot.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Do you think you could switch to push to talk? See if that works a little better. Like it's starting to get progressively worse. I don't know what it is.
Okay, I can try. Okay, now?
Yeah, that's better. So there are two different worlds, as you were saying.
Yes. As we have said that Star Wars: The Old Republic is more like a theme park. Final Fantasy is sort of a little bit the same with the fact that it has zones that you have to go through with a loading screen, but the zones are much more free and they are much more alive than in Tor. A Tor sort of gives the semblance of trying to be alive, while Final Fantasy actually is alive. And Final Fantasy has much more just life to it in general. Like a lot of the mechanics in Final Fantasy are very friendly to role players. For example, you can furnish your home in just about any way you can imagine. You can put food out on tables and you can move around the food, and you can actually sit down on the chairs and stuff like that. You can change your pose. You can stand in one way and then you can make an emote that changes your pose, and then maybe you shift your weight to the other leg. You can cross your arms, things like that makes roleplay really feel alive. While in Tor is very static, and they don't have much in terms of role play at all. You sort of just had to make do what was there. The only thing that is really compelling about Tor is the fact that it is Star Wars, because Star Wars itself has so much to offer in terms of lore and characters and interesting encounters and things that you can do with the game because it's so free in terms of roleplay. Final Fantasy is it has lore. Of course, it has quite a lot of lore. It has some interesting characters, but it is not as expansive as Star Wars. But I feel the mechanics in the game that are so RP friendly really makes up to it. And as Star Wars is very convenient to role players because it's easy to get money and it's easy to like if you unlock a specific gear set, you can just get it again from a sort of collections tab where you can just get it
It's a
directly.
countdown.
Yeah, exactly. And that doesn't exist in Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is very unforgiving when it comes to game mechanics. It's you have to grind for just about everything there is. You want to make money, then you have to sit down and you have to craft and all that shit-assle. But RP-wise, Final Fantasy is definitely superior in every way. to Tor.
So, what do you RP as in Final Fantasy XIV?
My main character is called Nalia Swanra, and she is the sister of our mutual friend Alex, who plays Dwasit Swanra, and they are, they've been orphaned. We sort of have the criminal thing going on there too. They were orphans. They grew up together. They are very tight. They are very close. And now Alex created this guild that is called Path of the Rootless, which was initially designed to be a adventure guild where we wandered around and we did the, odd mercenary job. We just lived for the moment, etc. Now, due to a storyline that I crafted, which was called The Black Hand, Dwasit sort of ended up becoming a soldier in the Mafia. So now we're sort of geared toward Mafia roleplay again. With we have more and more people joining the guild every day almost, and they are sort of becoming associates. And we have a roleplay hub that we created, which is a tavern/whorehouse called the Red Hibiscus, where we hang around and where we make our schemes and etc. etc.
You spoke of a recent storyline that you did that had the Path of the Ruthless pivot around towards more gangsterish themes. So my question to you is that what is it about storyline creating that you enjoy?
Well, the fact that I can craft a story. Like, I love writing. I love reading about stories, like we talked about when we talked about The Witcher 3. I really love storytelling, and I love crafting storylines in roleplay, because then I can sort of, it's a way to invite people into my imagination. And I can also, I can put obstacles for people, and I can give people an experience. And I like to really create these weird characters they can interact with, that can impact them, and create events that, they will find enjoyable or scary or whatever. And doing that is just something that I love. And afterwards I see people having reactions to my NPC characters or to things that is happening. People have sort of also gotten to know my event, how I make events. Like, for example, I like to, if we're going somewhere or something, the characters are walking somewhere, and then I can roll something that I just call a DM dice, which it's just, it's in Final Fantasy. It's a random number between 1 and 1,000. So I roll random. And when I do that, if it's a low number that comes up, everybody immediately in the general chat just goes, "Oh shit, he's doing it. Oh, here we go." They know that when I do that, there's going to be a random encounter, which is going to be either good or bad, depending on the roll. So if it's a low roll, the lower it is, the worse it's going to be. So if it's I roll a 7 on a 1,000 dice, it's going to be something pretty goddamn terrible that's going to happen. And they know that by now. And that's also something that's fun, seeing how people react to my storytelling. And people seem to really appreciate it too. They seem to appreciate my storylines. And that's also something that I love, to feel that sort of feedback and the reactions of people.
I think I think when you said it's a way to invite people into my imagination, I think that line resonated with me the most. I think that that can also be said about generally of role play in general, and the fact that you're sharing a piece of your imagination with everyone else, or at least so long as they accept it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
It then brings me to the next topic of conversation, which is more about talking about RP at large, our collective experiences and such like. And again, this is where we really get into experimental territory. So here goes nothing.
Ready if you are.
Yep. When we spoke about your earlier RP experiences, you talked about how, everything you were doing, you were trying to find answers to questions in an effort to expand your knowledge. And it seems to me that there is a correlation between how much lore you know about a role play setting versus how intensive, or I suppose more improved, your role playing skills are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree with you.
But one of the things I've noticed is that the more that the more, or sorry, the more experienced you are in RP, the, I suppose, less open you are to learning how to do things in a new way. I guess the best way I can sort of draw a metaphor here is fluidity versus crystallization, right? As you become more experienced in something, the amount of experience hardens your outlook, if that makes sense. My question to
Yeah,
you is that, because you've migrated between two different settings, or, well, three different settings if you want to count WoW, four even if you want to count Elder Scrolls, whatever. Do you find that, you have to maintain some sort of flexibility in your outlook as you learn the ropes again between each um, RP setting, or are you able to mostly manage? What's that like for you?
when I move between games, I sort of have to drop all all the preconceptions of what I'm known or what I think that I know, and because settings can differ so incredibly vastly. Like if you take Star Wars: The Old Republic and compare it to Elder Scrolls, you can't really take your notions of everything you know about how to roleplay in Star Wars with you into something that is so incredibly different a scene. So you go in there and you have to drop everything. You sort of have to relearn everything again. Um, and then usually, if I shift scene and I don't know anything about how the game is or how the roleplay community is or how people roleplay, I start off with something that is incredibly easy to roleplay, something that is very, very down to earth and simple. And then I use that character to start feel out the world. And then you can start with something, relatively innocent, like, I don't know, something that would be okay in all settings. Because, basically all character concepts exists in every game in some sort of form. Not same form, but you
Like
can start,
tropes, you mean?
yeah, tropes. And so you can start off as, I don't know, you can start off as a street rat, pickpocket, young guy or young girl, and start to, feel out how role plays a little bit, start interacting with some role players. If you can start with, okay, I'm going to start playing a Breton, maybe for example in ESO, you just take a quick course on Google and you read a little about what is a Breton. Okay, it's this. And then you pick that character, you put it in a setting where you don't have to have any sort of power, you don't have any authority, you don't you can move sort of fluidly between different sort of settings, like criminal RP or soldier RP or whatever. You sort of just you start off with a blank paper and you let your role play guide you, and you talk to more experienced role players and you interact and you learn by hand, and eventually you are an experienced role player again in ESO or whatever game you're playing. That's how I go about it anyway.
Earlier before you said that you like to write, that you're a writer. One of the chief rules that most writers agree on is write what you know. Do you think this rule applies to you as well?
Mm, difficult question. Yeah, it does. But I also like to learn new things and sort of dabble into new settings and dabble into new uh, plot lines. So I say it's a little of both. It's like I mix it up a little bit, but I never just drop all the reins and jump into jump into out of the blue and into the black. It's more like I feel it out a little bit, and when I feel that, okay, but this worked, then I can go deeper down that path. If that makes any sense.
Right, but when it comes to creating a character, you originally start with something that's familiar that you know about. For instance, with Kane, you seem to have nailed down the idea of self-blame pretty well, in the fact that, he blamed himself for his brother. That's a very human thing to cover. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, and yeah, that's right. I like to make characters that are riddled with issues, and often when I make characters that have issues, they usually have some sort of guilt. I really like playing onto that. Guilt and self-hatred are my big things when it comes to characters. Usually, even my new character Nelia Swanner, she has a lot of guilt. Or it's not the same kind of guilt as with Kane. Both she and her brother, they have, for example, for a very long time, they've had nobody but themselves. Ever since they were children, they have been mostly isolated from other people in the fact that they have been orphaned, and they have been, street rats. They've only ever relied on themselves. Nelia Swanner absolutely idolizes her older brother, who has cared for her always. And, as they got older, they got into puberty and all of that together. They sort of started becoming a little bit, incestual. And that is a big guilt and a big sense of, disgust towards, as they got older and understood that, this is bad. You don't do this. This is horrible. This is not accepted socially. And at the same time, they have been doing it for such a long time. Her older brother is everything that she has ever needed. He is a father to her, an older brother, and he is a lover. And everything that she had ever needed emotionally, he has always filled that role. And as they got older, they realized that, we can't be together that way. We're supposed to be siblings, which leans into a lot of, the conflict of feeling attracted, feeling lust for someone you're not allowed to feel that for, that you're not allowed to have, which in turn leads into self-disgust and, self-blame and a sense of, I don't know the word, feeling powerless, sort of.
I think you nailed it perfectly with feeling powerless, with maybe a sense of helplessness. Is that what you're going for?
Yeah, exactly. That's a better way to put it.
So why guilt and self-hate? What is it about those two themes that interest you?
I think they make for very human and interesting characters, and I think that is sort of the most common traits for all humanity. I think that everyone carries self-hate, and everyone carries self-doubt, and everybody feels self-hatred and all that. I think that is something that is very universal for everybody in the world, even people who are very successful. I think everybody feels they are lacking somehow. And I like bringing that into the roleplay scene, because in a lot of other role players, in a lot of other characters, they sort of delve into games to come away from this. They want to escape what they are, and they create characters that are strong and never doubt themselves, characters that are heroic, characters that are, they don't have issues, or they don't have the things that we consider to be weak. They're not ugly. They don't feel ugly. They are not overweight. They are not, they are all these things that are very human. They put that behind them, and they create characters that make up and complement their OC insecurities. But I want to do the opposite. I want to create characters that are human, and I want to create characters that do have issues, and
Sort of a thought experiment thing that's going on.
yeah, exploring it more than shying away from it. I want to explore it and revel in it, sort of.
Earlier before, you also mentioned that one of your favorite writers was, well, actually, I know that your favorite writer is Stephen King. We've talked about him a number of times in the past, but for podcast's sake, I have to ask, what is it about Stephen King that stands out to you more so than the other writers that you've come across?
Exactly the same thing as we were just talking about. The fact that he don't write about heroes. He don't write about the Superman or the awesome bounty hunter who is put in a difficult place, or the extraordinary character that is put in an ordinary situation. He turns everything around. He puts ordinary people in extraordinary situations. And these characters are so relatable and so lovable, because they are characters that you feel like you could go out and around the block you would find this person, because they are not in any way people that you would find only in the dreamscapes of the imagination. They are normal people that feel very real.
Do you think Roland Deschain is someone that you could find around the block?
Roland Deschain, I think, is like the only or actually no, I go back on that. Roland Deschain is a very ordinary guy.
Really? Okay, why is that?
Because he's not in any way, he is a human being in every sense of the word. But I mean, he's trained from childhood to be a gunslinger. And gunslingers are basically the Jedi Knights of the Dark Tower universe. But Roland Deschain is he is the hero / anti-hero character, but he has a lot of issues and he has a lot of regrets and he carries a lot of things. He has a baggage on him. He's made mistakes and he makes mistakes throughout all the books, and he is the badass cowboy that Stephen King dreamed up when he was watching spaghetti westerns. He is the how can I forget the name? How can I forget the name of this guy?
No name.
Yeah. No. What's the actor? The actor that is based
Clint Eastwood.
Clint Eastwood. Exactly. He is the Clint Eastwood of Stephen King's imagination, but I don't think that he is any way inhuman. The inhuman characters in the Dark Towers are, of course, Randall Flagg and the Crimson King and Mordred and things like that. But even these characters have human traits. But Roland Deschain, he is a gunslinger. He's absolutely badass. It says in the book that he draws his gun so fast that you can't even see it. But I mean, none of the things that he does are actually supernatural. And he as a character is not supernatural. He's not unrelatable. On the contrary, I'd say. Even his skills are anchored in real life. I mean, you can learn to be that fast. Like, if you don't believe me, you can go out right now and you can YouTube the fastest gunslinger in the world, and you're gonna find a guy who is actually, who is actually that fast and that accurate. So it's not impossible. And so yeah, I
sure you could look at like Bob Munden, a dude who looks like he's overweight, but boy, oh boy, if you see him just draw a gun, oh man, it's.
Oh yeah,
I'm sorry,
go ahead. I think that's the guy. I mean,
he's 100% American. No, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, yes. Oh, what can I say? Damn Americans. They always, everything has to be the biggest and everything has to be the best, and they have to do it before everyone else. Assholes.
I would argue that perhaps towards the end of the books or the end of the series, Roland Deschain is someone you could find on around your block. But in the beginning, where he's emulating the child Roland, when he's heading towards the Dark Tower, when he's even in that town, he's not someone that I could really picture to be relatable. I would say it's more as he spends time around. I forget the little kid's name. Jake,
yeah.
Jake, and the lady who I can't remember as well because I'm so great with names. What was her name? You know who I'm talking about, Mike? The I think she was a prostitute at one point. I gotta look her up. It's gonna bother me.
Prostitute.
Susan.
Oh yeah. What was the question again? I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying that I hear what you're saying about Roland being mostly human. My argument is that not at first, not until he starts spending time with Jake, and then when he rediscovers Susan again, that he gets back in touch with his human side, because the quest for reaching or taking down Randall Flagg really does dehumanize him in a way, because it becomes his singular obsession, right?
Yeah.
But as he interacts with people again, then I would say that he comes back to being human at some point. In fact, perhaps we could argue that the entirety of the Dark Tower series is more or less someone who has been dehumanized regaining his humanity, because towards the end it's really not so much about stopping the Dark Tower from being destroyed, but more or less to save what he has. It becomes more personal for him, I guess.
Yeah.
Besides the whole revenge plot, but that's neither here nor there. With all that being said, between writing and RP, we can agree that the nature of the two is very similar. But at the same time, there's also some nuances that put down a fine line of demarcation between the two. One of them, I'd argue, is the fact that if you're writing by yourself, you pretty much have a hand in deciding whatever happens. But when you're writing cooperatively, shall we say, it's not so much, you don't have that sort of freedom or wherewithal to do that. It becomes general acceptance-based etiquette sort of thing. Do you find that when it comes to writing cooperatively for others, or when it comes to RPing with others, you have to sort of censor yourself in any way, versus when it comes to writing on your own, you're free to do however you wish?
I think that yes, to a point. I think that when I'm writing on my own, I sort of feel that I can make anything happen. I can make whatever characters as brutal, as obnoxious, as much in your face as I want. And if you don't like it, you don't have to read it. But in RP, it is sort of like you have to keep a certain etiquette to not going too far with things, because there is someone else who has to get a say in it too. And I like gritty things. I like gritty. I like darkness. I like violence. I want to show people what the world is like. But a lot of other people, they go to games like that because they want to forget about what the world is like. Feel like I have to tone down some things. I can't play a character who is too much in, let's say, the regard of darkness, or too much violence, or too much. I don't know how to put it. People don't want to see or necessarily they don't necessarily want to see someone who is, overly violent and, just full of, spewing vomit during tavern night, or someone who is, a drug addict who takes an overdose and dies on the dance floor. They necessarily don't want to see that kind of content. And then you have to tone that down.
Does that tick you off some, or is that, just more of reorienting yourself?
It can tick me off sometimes. If I feel that I have toned it down and people still take offense, I feel that they are overly sensitive. And then I'm sort of like, I want to shrug it off, and I'm like, okay, that maybe you should stop being a child. But I mean, at the same time, that's unfair, because it's, when you're RPing with a bunch of other people that you don't know, you are in some sense forcing content on them that they don't necessarily came there to see. So I can understand, even though I do find it maybe ridiculous that someone takes offense because I emoted with the word fuck in it or something like that, and people get upset. Then I'm like, what are we, 10? But I can also understand, like when I calm down, I feel like, okay, well, yeah, I can understand. If it's you don't want to see that kind, you don't want to see swear words, you want to roleplay in a negatively free environment, then okay, just, I'm not gonna roleplay with you.
I can sort of get that. My only response to that is, on the topic of cursing, really, the only time I get ticked off with it is if I don't feel it's comparable to the world. So if someone says fuck in a fantasy world, which, it happens, right? And they even say fuck off in Game of Thrones all the damn time.
Yeah.
But, if someone says it in, say, Star Wars or, Elder Scrolls or, Guild Wars 2, well, it's not like any of the other world, any characters in the world would say something like that, and that in and of itself becomes more immersion breaking for me. What breaks your immersion? Let me ask you that. Tell me about a time that you were taken out of your RP experience, if that has ever happened to you.
Oh, that has happened a lot of times. Usually it is when people make things that are absolutely ridiculous. Maybe they have a good thought about it. Like, for example, you remember that guy that joined the Roses for a while who claimed that he had a device so he could teleport wherever he wanted. It was a
oh yeah, it was a Gree device or something like that.
Yeah, it was like a Gree hypergate, he called it, or something like that. And I mean, Gree hypergates exist, but they're like these huge machines that takes time to warm up, and they are super rare, and basically no one's ever seen it. And he was walking around with a pocket version that he could just set up wherever he wanted and teleport wherever he wanted. And he started this sort of spontaneous event where he set up it in the fountain in one of our strongholds and teleported into the personal home of a Darth on Drummond Cos. And at that time, I felt like I was in the Star Wars Christmas special. It's just that nothing makes sense. You don't know, why is this happening? Who came up with this? Nothing, everything about it felt like my character was having a dream, a weird dream. And the guy who created the event didn't understand that it was in some way, absolutely unrelatable and impossible and stupid. He had his heart in the right place. He wanted to create content for everybody, but it's just that, check your sources a little bit before you just make things. I mean, I can understand. It would be easy for me too to, if I don't, for example, know the lore in Final Fantasy and I roleplay a mage, to say that I cast a spell and I teleport to this place. You feel that it's a fantasy setting. The stretch of logic isn't that far, but in the game's lore, it's like doing that it's actually not possible. It's like nobody can do that. But I mean, if you don't check your sources, you won't know.
To me, the difference between authenticity and realism is that authenticity is what you can find within the realm of the game itself, or the setting that you could find that brings you the immersion of the world, whereas realism is applying I guess, the sort of laws and dynamics of the real world down to a science level to the RP setting. Would you agree with that definition?
Yeah, yeah, I would.
So let me ask you this then. What are some factors that flesh out authenticity in a role-playing experience for you?
Wow, difficult question. Some factors that flesh out authenticity. Wow. I mean, it varies from game to game, of course. It's you can have, I mean, like for example, in Final Fantasy, um, there's a lot of things that they have made up a whole science regarding how Final Fantasy, like how magic works, and everything comes from everything is, you know, it works with it works through systems that they have created, and nothing is just, you know, oh, it's just magic, you know, it's just magic, it works because it's magic. Everything is created, detailed, with its own rules and with its own science behind it, to sort of really make it feel like, okay, this is this world's science. And that makes me feel like it's really authentic. That makes me feel like, yeah, I can relate to this because of that. And Final Fantasy especially does a very good job with that, because you have these different schools in magic that works in different ways. Uh, it's sort of like magic is part of the world. It is called Aether, and in the planet, or like in everything, there is this spiritual source of life, which is just called the life force, which is basically Aether, and everything contains Aether, and you can manipulate Aether through through in different ways to make things happen. And you can pull on your own Aether to manifest things in the real world, or you can pull upon other things around you to to create something. And there are schools of magic that are forbidden because they are so devastating, or because they are so dangerous to everybody around them, and accepted sector. But even though you can use this power and manifest things and manipulate the world, there are still like things that are impossible. And just because it's magic doesn't mean it's limitless, for example. And there are rules behind it that limits what the player can do, or what a role player can do. And since they have created this system and people use it, I can relate to it, and I feel like, yeah, this feels authentic to me. This feel like this could actually be an alternative universe that exists, you know. So I guess that is one of the things that makes me feel authenticity in a game.
The takeaway that I have from that is that so long as the setting itself has a set of rules or lore background that is congruent throughout, it's something that you can follow and have. And if there's an RP experience that is incongruent to what you understand, then it takes you out of the immersion. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I would say so.
My, I suppose, last question, because I just relooked at the time, and oh boy, we have been going at it for a long while.
Not well. I don't complain.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good. My only regret is that we can't talk a little bit more, but I got to get going soon. So
That actually brings me back to something that you told me a long time ago, and you said that the biggest passion of every role player is to talk about themselves.
yeah, I remember saying that. That's everybody likes to talk about themselves. We'll close this episode off with a 10-item questionnaire. This 10-item questionnaire was first developed by Marcel Proust, used by Bernard Pivot, and than James Lipton. Now we're going to use it here. This is where I take a more interesting magnifying glass to your head and see what makes you tick. 10 questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Number 1. What is your favorite word?
Metamorphosis.
What is your least favorite word?
Taxidermy.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Ingenuity, I'd say.
What turns you off?
Pig-headedness, selfishness, and yes, general ass-hattery.
What is your favorite curse word?
Fuck.
What sound or noise do you love?
Female moaning.
I agree with that 100%. What sound or noise do you hate?
High-pitched children screaming.
What profession, other than your own, would you like to attempt?
Being a writer.
What profession would you not want to do? Never in a million years they could pay you enough to do it.
I don't know what it's called, but it's the people who, they drive around these big tanks and suck up all the shit from, wells.
Like a sewage worker, street sweeper?
Sewage workers, I'd say, yeah.
And finally, for our last question, and this is going to be funny. Number 10. If heaven exists, if it does, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Welcome home, the horse are to the right.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode of RP Spotlight. Like I said, this was a very experimental episode. I wanted to see if it was possible to branch out from Elder Scrolls Online to RP in just general, covering someone's general RP career from start to finish. It was most enlightening. Mike, thank you so much for being my guinea pig.
Thank you so much for letting me be your guinea pig.
And as always, ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.